Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for attending. Happy Friday, and welcome to what is part 5 of our 13-part series on what's new in SQL Server 2012. My name is Kevin Goff, and this week we are actually going to be looking at some new capabilities in SQL Server integration services. If you've been attending the sessions, and particularly the one last week, we actually covered some of the new features in integration services, and I said that because the capabilities were so large that we actually run this over 2 consecutive weeks. So actually part 5 and going back to part 4 last week have actually been a 2-part series within this 13-part series where we've been focusing on new capabilities in integration services. So we're going to look at building a package using some of the new capabilities here today. Now, as I said, my name is Kevin Goff. For those who are attending for the first time, I'm a SQL Server MVP, and I also train and I'm a practice manager for a company called SetFocus. They're in Parsippany, New Jersey. We actually offer training in a variety of areas. Just a quick introduction here. Again, this is a 13-part series about new features in SQL Server 2012, a just the facts approach to the new capabilities. I know that when I go to any type of session myself and want to find out about the new features, I want to get right into the facts. What are the new capabilities? So been trying to use that theme all along as we go through the different features in SQL Server 2012. Now, just very quickly about me. My name is Kevin Goff. I train, as I said, for a company called SetFocus. A couple of URLs here that might be of interest to you. First of all, I've been covering this 13-part series on my blog. So the only thing you need to write down here is my blog, which is www.kevinsgoff.net. Actually, I'm going to tab over there in just a few minutes, and I'll show you the coverage of this webcast series. So the only thing you need to do is write it down, kevinsgoff.net, because that's where all the slide decks and all the demo code is residing. My email address is kgoff@kevinsgoff.net, and quick shout out to my company. As I said, I train for a company called SetFocus. We have an actual free training portal with about 100 hours of free training in .NET, SQL Server, Business Intelligence, and SharePoint. And these training videos are actually lifted from our actual curriculum in the class. So if you want to get a good example of what we cover in class, just feel free to go to freetraining.setfocus.com. Again, all these URLs are here in the slide deck. Now, we're in part 5 of our 13-part series, and this is actually a 2-in-1 here. It's part 2 of a 2-part series within this on new capabilities and integration services. Here's the schedule the rest of the way. So next week, we're actually going to turn our attention to the analytics side of SQL Server and look at some of the new capabilities in the business intelligence semantic model. Quite a number of new features here. As a matter of fact, for the next several weeks, we're going to be looking at literally a whole new world here for creating analytic databases. So that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. Well, I'm actually going to jump forward and go to the 5th part here. So lots of slides to navigate through here until I get up to part 5, as I'm flipping through all the prior weeks here. So again, last week I covered the new features in integration services. I'm actually going to demonstrate how we can create a package from scratch. Now, this is going to be a rather adventurous demo here. I'm going to talk here in the slide deck for just a few minutes about what I'm going to create, and then I'm going to go over to SQL Server Data Tools and actually build a package from scratch and deploy it and demonstrate some of the new features in SQL Server 2012. So you're going to look at creating a new package within a new integration service project and then deploying it to SQL Server and seeing some of the new integration services management dashboard features that are available in 2012. Well, along the way, if you've never built a package in integration services or you've been just trying to get up to speed with integration services, this demo might be of particular interest for you, even aside from just the new SQL Server 2012 features. You're going to look at some common ETL patterns. Now, if you're not familiar with the ETL acronym, it stands for extract, transform, and load. That's really the common theme for many of the integration services packages we might build. Anytime you've got some type of a database job where you're retrieving data from one from one set of source information, whether it's Oracle or SQL Server or spreadsheets or whatever, and then you want to do something with the data in the middle. You want to validate it, you want to split it apart, you want to group it. So in other words, you want to transform it into something else and then load it into some final destination, whether that's SQL Server or Oracle or even MySQL or spreadsheet files or CSV files. Well, that's the loading at the end. So anytime you have an extract job that falls into that general scenario, integration services can definitely help you out. Well, we're going to look at a package that loads data from, in this case, from some CSV files. We ultimately want to load the information into some SQL Server tables, but we want to do some validations in the middle. And we also have a situation where we don't know the names of the files that we're going to be importing. We know they're going to follow a general format, but we don't know the exact names. So we're going to need to implement some kind of a dynamic connection string to the files, again, not knowing what the names are going to be until runtime. And the package I'm going to build is also going to incorporate some stored procedures into an integration services package. Sometimes people coming into integration services are somehow under the impression that when you build things in SSIS, it's all a wizard-based approach, and you never write any kind of code, either database code or any kind of scripting code or whatever. And that's actually not the case. It's not a matter of integration services versus stored procedures. You can easily incorporate stored procedures in an integration services package. As a matter of fact, a lot of people will do most of the work in extract jobs in stored procedures, but still use SSIS to sort of direct the overall workflow. Because, again, there might be things we need to do out in the file system, or we might need to send emails or do other types of notifications. Well, we can use integration services for what it's really good at and still utilize our stored procedures. But we need to understand how we marry them together. And so this package is actually going to demonstrate that. So jumping forward here, now this looks a little bit complicated when we look at the end result here, but this is the ETL package that we're going to put together here today. I'm actually going to download some files from an FTP server. I've got a test FTP server. I'm going to download some CSV files that actually have exchange rates, and they correspond to the AdventureWorks currency rate table that has exchange rates for different countries and different rates with respect to the US dollar. Well, I'm going to pull down some files from an FTP server, not knowing how many they're going to be. I'm going to loop through the files, validate the rows, because there might be some currency codes in there that aren't valid currency codes. So after I retrieve the files from the FTP server, I'm going to loop through them, and I'm going to process all the information inside of each individual file. Now, I'm not going to load the contents directly into my final destination table. I'll show you in a minute what that's going to be. I'm going to actually load it into a staging table. And then at the end, after I'm finished looping through all the files and maintaining some counters on how many good rows I've processed, how many bad rows I've encountered, and how many files altogether I've encountered, at the end I'm going to run one stored procedure that's going to utilize something that was new in SQL Server 2008, the merge command, because some of the data I brought in might be new rows and some of them might be existing rows. So instead of trying to do two separate insert and update statements, we can actually utilize the Transact-SQL merge capability to update a production table from a staging table, where the merge will, again, insert the new rows and update existing rows if there was any change that needed to be made. Well, the package is also going to send an email to somebody if there's a reason to send an email, if we actually encountered new or existing rows. Well, there are a lot of people these days who are using Google Mail. It's a fact of life. There are people out there who are using Google Mail, even if they're working in an otherwise dedicated Microsoft shop, or they're using all the Microsoft development tools. They might be using Gmail, either in production or maybe just for test purposes. Well, SSIS has a number of built-in tasks, and one of them is the ability to send mail. And that works great for some SMTP servers, but Google Mail is a little bit different. We have to authenticate in a way that the built-in send mail task isn't designed for. And so we're actually going to see where we can write a script in integration services to actually send a mail using some C# script inside of an SSIS package. So once again, just because you use SSIS and you use the wizard-based approach for some of these components Doesn't mean that you don't write code somewhere. You definitely will. Now, in the data flow of this package, because every package has a control flow that directs the overall operations, and then we have a data flow that processes the rows. Well, because we're breeding in CSV files, we're going to convert the data to the corresponding SQL Server data types. Then we're going to validate the incoming currency codes, because maybe there's some currency codes coming in that are not correct. So we might do a lookup into our currency master, send the bad rows one way and send the good rows another way. In this case, we're going to send the good rows to a staging table. And then outside this loop, we're going to run a stored procedure. So this package is going to demonstrate a new capability in SSIS 2012 called parameters. We're going to set up some parameters so that this package can be run for a couple of different scenarios, like a different folder that might be used, or maybe a different email sender and recipient. We're going to look at conditionally executing some tasks. We only want to run the stored procedure if this loop encountered any rows. And we only want to send an email if the stored procedure actually either inserted or updated data. Going to look at dealing with staging tables. Again, it's a pretty common practice to load data not directly into the target table, because we might be doing a million inserts one at a time, but instead we're going to load it into a staging table and run one final merge at the end. Going to look at integration services scripts. Again, we're going to have a script to actually send the email. We're going to look at deployment of this package to the new deployment capabilities in SQL Server in integration services. Going to look at integrating store procedures with a package, and as I said, we're going to look at using scripts to send an email. Now, a bigger picture of the control flow. The next slide here just simply has the control flow expanded. The steps we're going to go through, and I'm going to hop over into Visual Studio in just a minute or two and actually create this package. But the steps are going to be in the control flow. I'm going to create or drop a staging table. Maybe it's already there, and I just need to truncate the contents of it. I'm going to create a local folder, because I'm going to pull down files from an FTP server and put it into that folder. But I don't know what the name of the folder is going to be, because that's going to come from a parameter. Then I'm going to pull down files from an FTP server and pull down the files into that folder. Then I'm going to loop through the CSV files in that folder. And one at a time, I'm going to open each of the CSV files, not knowing the name of the file, process the rows, and that's handled in the data flow, which is in the next slide, and then accumulate the number of good rows are encountered, the number of bad rows are encountered, and increment a file count of the number of files that I processed. Because I might have processed 5 files, and maybe the first one had 10 good rows, and the next one had 20 good rows. So I want to accumulate them into one variable at the end. And then at the end, I'm going to run a stored procedure if it's necessary to do so, if I actually encountered good rows. And that stored procedure is going to bring back, after it runs the merge command, it's actually going to bring back the number of inserts, the number of updates, and if I actually had some activity, I'm going to send an email using Gmail, so I'm going to have to write a script. And then in the data flow, which is going to run for each file, well, I'm going to open up each CSV file not knowing the name of it. So I'm going to have to implement something dynamically here. I'm going to convert the data to SQL Server data types, and then I'm going to do a lookup into the currency master. I've intentionally put a few rows into the currency file that are incorrect, because I want to demonstrate the lookup and the ability to redirect any failures to an alternate pipeline here. Then I'm going to send the good rows in another direction and ultimately just write them to the staging table. And then back at the end of the package, run a SQL merge between the staging table and the final production table. So I'm going to hop over to my desktop. And give this a second. And I'm going to come over to, not to Visual Studio just yet, but I want to talk about the files that I'm going to process. Well, I've got 2 CSV files. I'm calling them US to Japan and US to Mexico. They are currency rate files or CSV files. Well, if I open them up in Excel just to show what's in it, I'll open up one of these, and I've got currency conversion rates from the U.S. dollar to the Japanese dollar, to the yen. Now, these numbers are completely made-up numbers. These are not actual numbers. I just literally manufacture some numbers and vary them by 1 penny for each new day. So I've got currency rates from the U.S. dollar to the Japanese dollar for about 5,000 rows in here. So I've actually got exchange rates going all the way on out to September the 9th of 2022. So obviously this is just demo data. Well, over in Management Studio, so I'll hop over to SQL Server Management Studio. And sorry for all the hopping around here. Over in Management Studio, we've got the table sales.currency rate, which is part of AdventureWorks. Well, that's our production table that has each currency rate date, the from code, the to code, the average rate, and the end of the day rate. Well, in a nutshell, what we want to do is pull in these files, which we're going to pull down from an FTP server. We want to validate the from currency code and the to currency code, or at least one of them, to make sure that they're valid. I intentionally threw in a bad record here with a code of ZZZ. Obviously, we don't have a currency code of ZZZ, so that one is going to be kicked out. And again, what we want to do is we want to insert any rows based upon the date, the from code, the to code that are not in the SQL Server table. And if the row is in the SQL Server table, based upon the rate, the from code, and the to code, we want to check the rates to see if it's necessary to do an update. If the rates are the same, we won't bother. If the rates have differed, then we'll do an update. Now, the way we're going to do that at the end is with the stored procedure that actually runs a merge. I'm going to talk about this just for a minute here, and then I'll come back and talk about this in detail when we actually get to it. The merge is new in SQL Server 2008. It allows us to basically do an insert and an update, and even a delete if we were doing a delete at the same time, the same line of code. So we specify the table that we want to either insert into or update, which in this case is the currency rate table. We specify the incoming table, for lack of a better word, which is called temp staging currency rates. Now we have to specify how the lookup occurs. Well, we got a business key here that's a combination of the currency rate date, the from code, and the to code. So we have to set the stage for what constitutes a failed lookup and therefore a need for an insert, and what would constitute a hit where we would potentially do an update. Well, after we specify the merge statement and the tables that we're using, we have a series of when statements. So it's almost like a combination of an insert and an update and a case statement all rolled into one. This is a fantastic feature. Requires a little getting used to, but it's actually a very popular feature, especially in data warehousing. Well, again, we have a series of when statements. When we don't have a match, then we're going to insert into that target table with the values from the source. If we do have a match, and if either of the rates differ, then we're going to do an update. So we're not going to do an update unless there's a reason to do so. If we had a match, and if either the end of the day rate or the average rate differed. Well, after we run this procedure, we want to know how many inserts and how many updates we had. We'd simply want to tally. Well, in SQL Server 2005, there was a new capability called output that would allow us at the end of an insert or an update statement to output the new values or the change values. Well, the merge statement in 2008 also leverages the output statement, and we actually can bring back the action that occurred on a row-by-row basis by using the command here, $action. And we're going to bring that back as an action name and redirect that into a table variable I've created up here called merge actions. Well, all I've got in here is just the action name. And what I'll do at the end is I'll count from that redirected table variable where the action was an insert or an update and put them into two variables and then bring them back. So the package will have the number of inserts and the number of updates that this merge actually did. So we're going to see how we can incorporate this in with a package. All right, now I've got some things that I certainly do not want to have to retype in here as part of the package. So I've actually got some miscellaneous code snippets out here in Notepad. I'm going to use sort of as a scratch pad. So you'll see me come over here to paste in some things so that I don't have to type them in front of everybody. So no one has to see my typing mistakes. All right. Well, I'm going to come over here to SQL Server Data Tools, formerly known as BIDS, and I'm going to create a new package. So I will click the File drop-down and create a new project. And this will be a business intelligence project and obviously an integration services project. And I will call the name of this project MS Webcast SSIS, and just put it off the root of my C drive. And let me get rid of some of the windows here. Well, in Solution Explorer, if you remember from last week, I said that one of the new features in SSIS 2012 is the ability to have shared connection managers. Well, I know that I'm going to need connection managers for my FTP server and for my database server as well. So let's assume that I were writing 5 packages that were all pulling from the same FTP server and using the same database. I could create the connection managers here at the project level instead of at the package level. So I'll create a new connection manager, and this will be an FTP connection manager. And the server name, my own test FTP server, is ftp.commongroundsolutions.net. The default port number for FTP is 21. My username, I have a dummy username and password that's SSIS 2008 test. It's only this username only gets you access to one folder structure, so not much damage can be done with it. Now, my FTP server actually utilizes passive mode, which some FTP servers will use. So I have to turn that on, and I'll test the connection, and that's fine. So I'll click OK, and I'll actually rename this. So I'll right-click and rename it, and I'll call this Shared FTP Connection. We'll also create a connection manager to my database. So I'll right-click on Connection Managers, create a new connection manager, and go down and implement an OLEDB connection. And I'll create a new data connection here that will point to my local instance of SQL Server, which is localhost SQL 2012. And the database I'm going to be using is going to be AdventureWorks 2008 R2. And so there's my local instance of AdventureWorks. And I'll rename that, so that's not nearly as long here, so I'll just rename that as local ADW 2008 R2. So I've got 2 shared connection managers. Well, I also want to specify a couple of package level, or excuse me, a project level parameters. I'm going to right click on parameters and open this up, and I'm going to create a couple of parameters here that I might use as global package variables. So that way, if I was using a standard email sender, well, I could use that again and again across packages, and if I need to change it, I could change it up at the project level. Well, I will add a new parameter, and I will call this email sender. And the data type will be a string, and the value here, my email address that I use, I have a dummy email address that I use for testing called setfocusbitest1@gmail.com. It's just a test email address that I've got set up in Gmail. So I will use that as my value. And I also, when I pull down files from an FTP server, I might want to have a global parameter for where the files are going to be processed locally. So I will create a second one here called local processed folder. And I'll make that a string. And I'm actually using, if I tab through here, I've actually got a folder that I set up ahead of time that was called Well, if I can find it. Okay, I think I might have actually, here it is over here. I actually named it CSV exchange rates. So back here in the project, I'll call this C:\CSV exchange rates. So I'll make these project level parameters. Well, I'll close this and save it. So I now have some parameters at the project level. Well, now I'm ready to work with the package. Well, in the package, there are some variables I'm going to want to I'm going to want to use at the package level. For instance, I'm going to need to know anytime I process through those files. If I come back to the folder where the files are, I don't know at any one time what the name of a file is. So I'm going to have a variable for the file, for the name of the file at any one time. And I also want to accumulate the number of good rows that I process and the number of bad rows that I process. So I'm going to need some counters for those. And I also want to know when that store procedure runs, how many inserts and how many updates it actually processed. So in the package, I'm going to right-click and I'm going to actually create some variables. So these are going to be at the package level. Well, I'll add a variable down here, and the first one will be for the CSV file itself. And the scope of that variable is going to be the package. All these are going to be package level variables, and this will be a string. Now I have no idea what the value is that'll be set at runtime. Then I'm going to have another variable here for the file count. I want to know how many files I processed. So I'll implement a variable here for the file count as an integer. Well, then I'm going to have individual counts for the number of good rows. So I'll have good row count as an integer and bad row count as an integer. But I'm going to accumulate them into total good row count and total bad row count. If we are processing files individually and we capture the tallies in the pipeline, but then we want to accumulate them, we have to actually have two sets of variables here. So we'll have total good row count and total bad row count. Well, I'm also going to want to know my number of inserts and my number of updates at the end. So I will create a variable called numInserts and number of updates. So those are going to be the variables that I'm going to have. Now it's always a good idea, just with any type of programming endeavor, to identify what's going to be variable to begin with. If we have to go back and add any more, we'll certainly go back and add them later. All right. Well, let me bring this down here. And notice how I have the connection managers, the shared connection managers at the bottom. So they're available in all the packages. Well, let me get this started. Actually, I want to rename this package. I don't want to call it package. So I'll right-click and rename this package, and I'll call it ETL merge. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure that table, I have a temporary table over in SQL Server. If I go back to Management Studio here. In Management Studio, I have a temporary table called temp staging currency rates. We're initially dumping the data into this table. I want to make sure it's empty. So at the very beginning, I'm going to bring in an execute SQL task whose job is going to be, so I'll rename this. I'll say this is going to truncate the staging table. Well, I'll right-click on this and edit it. And I have to specify, if I'm running an execute SQL task, I first have to specify what the connection is. Well, it's going to be that local AdventureWorks connection that I build in the Share Connection Manager. Then I have to put in a statement. Well, this is going to be truncate table. And then the name of it, because I am too lazy to type, is VBO.temp staging currency rates. So this will actually truncate that table at the beginning. Now, this doesn't bring back any kind of result set. It's just simply running the command, and that's that. Well, I also want to make sure that folder that I'm pulling files down into exists. Remember, that was the parameter up the project level, the one for the local process folder. maybe that exists, maybe it doesn't. So I need to bring in a file system task. And in the file system task, so we have some housekeeping work to do here at the beginning. I'm going to go to the operation area, and I'm going to create a directory, and it's actually going to come from a variable. There's an option here to either hard code the name in or actually specify it from a variable. Well, I'm going to say that this is coming from a variable. Now, it could be a variable or it could be a parameter. Notice when I click this drop down, I have my project level parameters available here. So it's recognizing the option to specify any of the parameters either at the project or the package level. Well, I'll pick the local process folder. Now, if you've ever used SSIS before, and specifically the file system task, you know that if I run this the first time and then folder isn't there, it'll create it. If I run it a second time, it'll bomb because it's going to say the folder already exists. Well, we need to set that use directory if exists to true. So that'll just simply use it if it's already there. So some basic housekeeping tasks here. Well, then the next thing I want to do is pull down the files from the FTP server. So I'm going to bring in an FTP task. Well, in the FTP task, I'll rename this here. Say pull down CSV files from FTP server. And this file system task up here, I'm going to rename it. Always a good idea to give some meaningful name for the task here. So create local processing folder. And in the FTP task, I'm going to right-click and edit it. The FTP connection I'm going to use is going to be that shared FTP connection. Well, when we implement an FTP task, the two steps are first of all to specify the connection, and then to go to the file transfer area and specify what we want to do. Well, I want to receive files. I want to pull files down from the server. Now I've specified what the path is. Well, if I click the ellipsis button here, it'll actually take me to the folder that's associated with that login of SSIS 2008 test. Well, I've got an upload to download folder here. And if I go to the download folder, I've got both files. Well, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pick one of them. And then I'm going to come out and change this to star.csv, which means that it'll basically pull down anything out there that corresponds to that file spec. And I'm going to bring it down into the local folder. So I'm going to specify that that's coming from a variable. And the local variable here is, once again, that project level variable local process folder. Now, because those files might already exist out there, I'm going to overwrite them. So I'm going to specify overwrite file at destination. So I'll take OK. Now, right now, I've got three tasks that are running in the control flow. Well, I need to specify some order precedence here. I wouldn't want to run the FTP task until I know that this is run, in case I've got a brand new folder. So SSIS has precedence constraints that can allow me to define the order of execution. Now, this truncate, even though it's not going to take that long, obviously, is going to be able to run independently of these two. This doesn't need to wait for these two to run. So we can actually have this run in parallel with these two sets of tasks. Well, now what we want to do, now we're getting into the heavy part of the package. We want to loop through the files that we pulled down. I'm going to go to the container area, and I'm going to bring in a for each loop container. For each loop is actually a very versatile task. It lets us loop through a lot of different types of things. In this case, I want to loop through the CSV files. Well, this one I'm going to want to run after this runs and this runs. So I'm going to drag precedence constraints from both the truncate task as well as the FTP task. Well, in the for each loop, I'm going to right-click and edit this. And I need to specify in the collection area what I'm looping through, because this is a very versatile component. We can loop through files in a folder. We can loop through nodes in an XML structure. We can loop through objects in a SQL Server database. Well, I actually want to loop through the files in a folder. So I'm going to keep this at for each file enumerator. Well, I'm going to go down to the expressions area because I want to tell it what folder. And it's actually going to come from that variable. Notice there is a place to put a folder in here, but that's a hardwired folder. I'm going to click on the ellipsis. And for the actual folder itself, for the directory, I want to tell it to use that same package parameter. Well, there's no drop down here. We actually click the ellipsis button because this could be a full-blown expression. And I'll once again see my project level parameter. So I'll drag the local process folder, that project level parameter in here. That's going to be used as the directory when this executes at runtime. So even though this doesn't update the folder right now, it will use it at runtime. Well, I only want to work with CSV files, so I'll change this to, and actually just to even demonstrate this, I'll make it US star.csv in case there are any other CSV files out there. Now this for each loop, when it executes, if I brought down two files, it's going to execute twice. And what I want to do is I want to capture the name of the file, not knowing what it is. Well, what we do is we go to the variable mapping page on the left. And in the variable dropdown, I'm going to reference our package level variable CSV file. So that is going to hold at any one time, as we're looping through the files, the name, the fully qualified name of the file. We're going to need that to actually open up the contents. So click OK. Well, now I'm going to bring in a data flow component. So from the list of tasks here over on the left-hand side, I'm going to actually bring in a data flow task. The data flow task, if I right-click and rename this, is going to process rows in the CSV files. Well, the data flow task, if you're familiar with SSIS, is so big that it gets its own tab. So I'll right-click and edit this. Well, what I want to do one by one is open up each of the files and process the rows. Well, in the data flow, I'm going to bring in a flat file source. So from the list of items here over the left-hand side, I'm going to bring in a flat file source from the toolbox. Now, here's the challenge. I need to tell the data flow about the columns that are in these CSV files. Remember, from looking at these over in any of the folders, these actually have in here, oh, I already have this open in Excel, sorry about that. We already have over in Excel here the structure. It's currency rate date from code to code, average rate, and end of the day rate. Well, I want to easily discover that structure here in the pipeline, realizing that at runtime, I really don't know what the names of the files are going to be. What do you do in this case? There's actually a couple things you can do. One of them, somewhat loosely, here's we can cheat. We can point to one of those files at design time here just long enough to discover its structure, but then turn around in the resulting connection manager and say, oh, by the way, at runtime, we're really going to use what's in that file name variable. So for this flat file source, which I'll rename and I'll say open CSV file, well, I will right-click and edit this. I'm going to create a local package level connection manager. Now, as I said, I need to point to one of those files just long enough to discover the structure. So I'm going to call this connection manager dynamic connection manager. Now, for the file name, because they don't let you point to a variable right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat. I'm going to take browse and go to that folder off the root of my C drive. I'm going to go to that folder CSV exchange rate files. So let me go to that folder. And in CSV exchange rate files, now there are no text. Notice in the lower right corner it looks for text files. I have to change this to CSV files. And I'll point to either one of these. I'll point to US to Japan. Well, the column names are in the first row, so that's checked on. I'll go to the column page here, and it discovers the columns. So I'll click OK. That's actually a very important point because now the columns are brought into the pipeline. Well, what I want to do now is say, okay, now that I actually grab the columns, and now subsequent components in the data flow are going to know about those columns, I'm going to come down to the connection manager, And I am basically going to tell it, you know what, at runtime, we're actually going to point to what's in that variable for the CSV file. So I'll come down to the connection manager, I'll right-click, and I'll go to properties. Going to dive deep into the property sheet. Now, I have a default connection string here that pointed to one of the files, but I'm going to actually override that with an expression. So I'm going to go into the expressions area and click on the property drop-down and go to connection string and say, oh, by the way, at runtime, we're really going to use that variable called CSV file, which is getting populated every time in that for each loop. So hopefully you see the pattern here. So right now, make sure that's actually utilizing the CSV file at runtime. Well, these files, when they come in, because they're CSV files, are going to come in a regular string format. We want to get them into the SQL Server data types. So I'm going to bring in a data conversion. Now they actually, it's funny. I'm still actually making the mental translation to the way they have the toolbox arranged by default in 2012. If you've worked with 2012 at all, you know that they actually arranged the toolbox differently. So anybody who is used to the way the toolbox used to be arranged have to get used to the new arrangement of components here. So I'm going to bring the data conversion in, and I'm going to hook this up with the pipeline, and I'll right-click on the data conversion and edit it, and I'm going to actually convert all 5 of these to the SQL Server data types. Now, it's just force of habit, I will actually call my converted columns here in the pipeline converted. Just a naming convention. Don't need to. You could stick with the word copy of, but I'm in the habit of calling these converted. So we've got converted versions of each of these, and I'm going to specify the data type in just a second. Well, the rates themselves, because in SQL Server they were using the money data type, I'm going to change the data type here to currency for both of these. The from code, the to code were actually Unicode strings with a length of 3. So I'm going to change the from code, the to code to a Unicode string in both instances with a length of 3 characters. And the currency rate date was actually a date time column, even though I believe date was the only part that was being used. Well, I'll utilize a database timestamp. So I've changed these to the SQL Server data types. And then click OK. Well, next thing I want to do is I want to validate that those incoming 2 codes are correct. If you remember, back in the CSV file, I intentionally put one of these in here incorrectly. Well, we're about to do a lookup to validate these. So I'm going to bring in a lookup component. And in the lookup component, I'll rename this and I'll say actually using a new keyboard that I'm still actually getting used to. I've got one of these really great wireless integrated keyboard and mouse pads, but still getting used to the feel of it. So I'm going to call this validate incoming currency code. And right-click and edit this. Well, the lookup, I'll go to the connection page first here, then I'll come back and talk about a few of these options. I'm going to go to the connection area, and I'm going to tell it I'm doing the lookup into the table called sales.currency. Sales.currency, if I actually go back over to Management Studio, if I say select star from sales.currency. Sales.currency has the master list of currencies. So I'm going to do the lookup into the currency table. Now, if I had 20 columns in that currency table, I really don't want to necessarily pick the table. I might, in the results, in the option to use results of a SQL query, just reference the columns from that table that are relevant for the lookup. But this is a small table, so I'm not going to bother with that. Well, I'm going to go over to the columns area. And if you're wondering why I did the data conversion, here's why. That original 2 currency code was actually a string, And the currency code of that master table is a Unicode string, as I see here when I put the mouse over and get the tooltip. If I actually try to do the lookup based upon that, well, we get an error message here because SQL Server is, and SSIS is very strict about the data types. We have to use the same data type. So that's why we did the conversion. So I'll take the converted to currency code and drag it there. Now, if I wanted to bring back anything into the pipeline as a result of a successful lookup, I'd actually bring back some of the columns here down in the output area. I'm not doing that here, so there's no need. Well, back in the general area, there's one other thing I need to do. I need to indicate how to handle any rows with no matching entries. Well, by default, that's going to fail the component if I have no matching lookup rows. Well, that's not necessarily a good thing. You know that old line about one bad apple spoiling it for everybody? Well, that would be the case here. One bad row would cause the lookup component to fail. I really don't want that to happen. What I want to do is redirect them to an airflow. So I'm going to redirect the rows to an air output. Well, I want to at least capture the row count of the number of bad rows. I'm going to bring in a row count transformation. So from the toolbox, I'll bring in a row count, and I'll put that on the left here, and I'll say that this is the bad row count. And I'll drag the red pipeline over to the bad row count, and I'll verify that I'm doing this based upon a redirection of rows. So now any lookups that fail go to the bad row count. Well, the good rows I want to bring over to a good row count. So I'm going to bring in another row count transformation. And this will be based upon a lookup match, so it verifies I want to do it based upon a match. And this will be the good row count. Now, I didn't specify the variable. Remember, I had two variables here. I'll right-click on the bad row count and edit it. Now, anybody who worked with the row count in 2008 will appreciate this. The interface is simpler here. The only thing we would ever specify is the name of the variable. Now, I've got bad row count and total bad row count. Remember, we're going to process many files here. Well, the first inclination might be to use the total bad row count. The problem is that this option is not additive. If we have 10 bad rows in the first file and 20 bad rows in the second file, this will overwrite any value that was in there. It's not going to accumulate it. So we need to do the accumulation ourselves. So I'm just going to specify bad row count here and good row count here. And then back in the control flow, we'll have to do the accumulation. Well, I want to send the good rows not to the SQL Server table, not to the regular SQL Server production table, but to that staging table. Now remember, that staging table, if I go back to Management Studio, is the one that gets truncated at the beginning. It has essentially the same structure as the regular sales.currency rate table, except we're going to insert the rows into here and then do a merge at the end. So I will bring in an OnlyDB destination, and I'm going to insert the good rows into that temporary table. So I'll drag the pipeline into there, and I'll rename this. I'll say insert into staging table. Then I'll right-click and edit this. Well, I've specified what I'm inserting into. Well, I'm inserting into the table that was temp staging currency rates. Same table as right here. Well, I have to go over to the mappings because this actually did default mappings based upon the original column names. Well, if you remember, we did some data conversions. Now, this would actually work. However, it would actually have to recast everything. Well, we already did the data conversion, so we may as well use them. So this isn't the currency rate date, but the converted currency rate date. This is the converted from code. This is the converted to code. This is the converted average rate, and this is the converted into the date rate. So that covers the data flow. So that's going to run back in the control flow for every file that we encounter. Now, we need to accumulate those variables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in 3 expression tasks that are going to accumulate the 2 variables for the counts and increment the number of files we processed. And I'll set this up with precedence constraints here inside of the for each loop. And this one will be accumulate good row count. This one will be accumulate bad row count. And this one will be increment file count. Now, before in SSIS 2008, you had to write a script. If you had a package level variable that you wanted to work with, you have to actually write a script. Well, that was a little bit of a pain. Well, this is much easier now. I can right-click on the good row count expression task here, edit it, and I'm going to say that the total good row count, I'm going to put in the ability to accumulate that with plus equals, and then the regular variable for the good row count. So that's going to accumulate good row count every time into total good row count. Same thing here for the bad row count. I'll right-click and edit that, and I'll say that the total bad row count is an accumulation of the bad row count for each individual file. Now, some people might have called that single file bad row count or something like that. Obviously, you could name this any way you want. And then for the increment of the file count, if I right-click and edit this, oh, sorry, my toolbar's getting in the way here. Let me do this. Well, I'll drag that down, and I'll say that is plus equals 1. Yeah, plus equals 1. Well, I might be tempted to run this right now just to see what's in the data. I haven't put in the store procedure call yet, but it might be good just to run it up to this point. Well, I'm going to do a couple things here. First of all, I'm going to make absolutely sure that my temp staging currency rate table is empty to begin with. So I'm going to know that I'm starting with a blank slate, I'm going to say truncate table, and then the name of my currency rate table. And I'm going to make sure that in my production table, because all of this data is anything 2009 and beyond, I'm going to make sure that that doesn't exist in my production table. So right now I have nothing in my staging table at all. Well, if I run this package and come back and look in this table, I should see close to 10,000 rows, I believe. Well, I'll run the package. So I'll start debugging here inside of bids. We're not finished yet, but we're getting closer. And that executes, runs pretty quickly. I'll stop debugging, and I'll come back over to SQL Server. And I now have all the records in that temporary table. I have 9,999. I had 10,000 possible rows, but one was a bad row. So that lookup took the one bad row and just simply redirected it to a bad row count. Now, I'm not doing anything with a bad row count in this package, but obviously I could. All right. Well, here's where the big part comes in. Now, by the way, I am probably, and I double-checked with Microsoft ahead of time, I'm probably going to go a few minutes past 1. I normally try to finish on time or a little bit early. This is actually going to go a few minutes past 1 here, but hopefully not too much beyond that. Well, the next step here is going to be to run a stored procedure to do the merge, but I only want to do it if I had rows to process. Well, I'm going to bring in on the outside an execute SQL task. And this is going to run the merge stored proc. Well, I'll drag the precedence constraint from the for each loop to the merge. But I only want to run this if my good row count, total good row count, was greater than 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the precedence constraint and edit it. And I'm going to say that that success is not just based upon the prior task succeeding, but also the total good row count being greater than 0. I'll click the ellipsis here to go pick the variable. By the way, this ellipsis wasn't here in 2008, which meant you had to type in the variable yourself or paste it in. Well, there's now an ellipsis button. And I'll say I only want to do this if the total good row count is greater than 0. Otherwise, there's no reason to run that store procedure. Well, now we have a formula here to indicate that that's only going to run based upon a condition. I can actually right-click on the precedence constraint, go to Properties, and go down to Expression and Constraint, or I'm sorry, go down to Show Annotation, and tell it to show that constraint option. That actually annotates that now, which is kind of cool. Now, it has its own mind as far as where it actually places it. You can obviously move the component around and sometimes get it to display in a different area. Well, now I'm going to run the store procedure. Now, just a quick review of that procedure if I come back to Management Studio. At this point in the package, temp staging currency rates is populated. I want to now do a SQL merge. And that's based upon our business key condition here. And that's the currency rate date, the from code, the to code. When they're not matched, I want to do an insert. When they are matched, I want to do an update if it's necessary. And I want to redirect all of the inserts and updates back into a table variable and then count them at the end and bring them back. So I'm going to right-click on this Execute SQL task and edit it. My connection is going to be the same here. It's going to be the AdventureWorks connection. And I'm going to run that store procedure. So I'm going to execute, and I think in my scratch pad here I have the reference to it. Yep. I'm going to execute merge temp currency rates. So don't have to type anything there. Now, there are no parameters for that procedure, but there is a single row result set coming back. So I have to change the result set here to a single row because I'm getting back, if I go back and look at that store procedure, I'm actually getting back a single row with the number of inserts and the number of updates. Well, I'll go to the result set, and I will tell it that the variable from the number of inserts is going to come from that result set name, which was also called num inserts. Now, it doesn't discover it. I have to type it in here manually. And then this will be number of updates that will come from num updates. So the result set name here is going to be mapped to that variable. And then what I want to do is I want to send an email to somebody if the number of inserts plus the number of updates was greater than 0. And, oh, this is, okay. I just noticed, and this is a little bit of a surprise, for some reason that lost the connection manager back here. I have no idea why. You right-click and edit that execute SQL task. Okay, I actually have no idea why that lost that. I don't know if it was just a random mouse click or what. That was the truncate. So either a quirk or just something I did here. So that was a truncate of the staging table. Might have had fat fingers there a few minutes ago. Okay, that's back to where it was. All right, so somehow. Oh, you know what? I actually, boy, talk about not paying attention. I actually must have dragged it an extra one because the truncate was right here. I thought that I had lost the connection manager on the original truncate. I must have just dragged an execute SQL task an extra time. So I'm glad it was me and not SQL Server Data Tools here. All right, I now want to send an email, but again I'm using Gmail, and the built-in SendMail task doesn't work with Gmail because we have to implement some additional network credentials. So I'm going to bring in a script task, and I'm going to send a notification email. Send notify email. And I will run this after the store procedure. However, I only want to do it if my number of inserts plus number of updates is greater than 0. So I'm going to right-click and edit this on the precedence constraint, and I'm going to say, you know what, do that based upon an expression and a constraint, and it's going to be if the number of inserts plus the number of updates is greater than 0. Now, there's no chance of that being a negative number. If there were, I might need to check each one individually. But so long as as long as adding those together gives me a result greater than 0, I can actually run the script task. And just like with the other one, I'll right-click and go to Properties, and I will show the annotation and specifically show the constraint option. Well, in the script task, I want to send it to the email sender that was associated with the project parameters. I had a project parameter here for the email sender. And I also want to tell them about the number of inserts and the number of updates. Well, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right-click and edit this the script task. And I'm going to put the script in C#. I actually have an option here for whether or not I want to use C# or VB. I'm a former C# developer. I only write C# code once in a while these days, mainly in scripts. So I use C#. Well, I have to tell it what variables I'm going to be using. Well, in this case, I'm going to be using the overall package parameter for the email sender. So I have to go find that here. So I'm going to use the email sender and also the number of inserts, the number of updates. So I need to tell it about the user variable for the number of inserts, the number of updates, as well as that project level parameter for the email sender. I'm going to right-click and copy these, and the reason will become apparent in a minute. I'm going to go edit the script now, and we have to actually kind of drop down to the basement here to implement the script. Well, that's going to launch here the script editor, where we can actually put in some .NET code into the main entry point here of the script. Now, first of all, there's some built-in namespaces that are used, and one of them is the DTS runtime namespace. But I also need to reference system.net.mail and system.net. I had something in the clipboard already. Let me paste that in there. So I need to copy these two and bring them in, because this is actually going to use those namespaces. Well, in the script itself, I want to send an email to whoever was in that recipient. Well, I'm going to paste in this code, although I am going to tweak it a little bit. I'm going to go over this code in a minute, but a couple of housekeeping things up front. The sender and the recipient, I want to come from that variable. So I'm going to create another variable here, a temporary variable. I'm going to say string email temp equals, and I'm going to reference that particular package level parameter that I called project that project level parameter email sender. So I'm going to copy that. Now, the way we have to reference this, we have to reference it using the DTS.variables collection. We can't reference it directly. So we reference that, and we have to use the value property, and we also have to cast it as a string. So that is actually the pattern that we have to take to reference the read-only variables that we specified. So quite a bit of handshaking going on here. Now, we also wanted variables for the number of rows inserted, number of rows updated. So I'll say int number inserted equals, and that'll be an int 32 DTS.variables, and that was the user variable called number inserted. And I have to use the value property. And then int number updated equals int 32, and then same concept here. Number updated. I think that's what I call it. Num updates. You have to make sure you use the same name here. Obviously, as you can tell, these are not strongly typed, so we have to go through this approach. All right, so my email sender is going to be that email temp. And the email recipient, I'll make it the same thing. So the sender and the recipient are going to be the same thing. And the SMTP server, I'm hardwiring that as smtp.gmail.com. The mail message, I'll change this here. I'll say number of inserts was, and then I'll concatenate that with, and I'll take number inserted and convert that to a string, and then create a second line, and in the second line say number of updates. Obviously you get the pattern here. Plus number updated dot toString, and then end that statement. So that's going to be my email message. Now, I'm not going to send any attachments here, but if you did, you'd have to actually create an attachment object. I'm going to comment that out here. I'm going to create a new instance of an HTML mail message, a new instance of an SMTP client. Now, for Gmail, we have to actually enable SSL, and we have to actually create our own credentials object. This is why the sendmail task doesn't work, because it doesn't incorporate this kind of logic into it. So we have to write a script on our own. Now, the password for this particular email address is this, and then I have to specify those custom credentials as the credential object for the SMTP client. Now, turn off this mail attachment, and then send the mail. So that's actually going to be it. So we have to grab the original variables and the package level parameter, put them in the local variables here. And then the rest of this is basically C# code. Well, I'm going to build this, so I'll take the option to build this, and that's actually going to compile it into the package. And I'll take exit. And at this point, that is the package. Now, I'm going to run this first in bids to make sure that it runs fine. And then I'm going to put it up in SQL Server. I'm going to pull it up SQL Server. And I'm going to try to finish this in the next 10 minutes. I apologize for going over, but I figured I might be going over a little bit today. This is just a pretty big exercise. Well, I'll run this first. Now, I need to make certain of a couple things. First of all, I'm going to actually close Excel here. I don't want to use any system memory I don't need to. And I will run this package, knowing that right now in the sales.currency rate table, I have no rates for the year 2009. If I query where the year of order date is greater than or equal to 2009, I actually have no records in that table right now. Well, I'll run this package. So I'll start debugging. It pulls down the files from the FTP server, does the processing, runs the merge, and is now sending the email. So got lucky the first time here, or so it looks that way. Well, I'll go over to my browser, and let me refresh my inbox, and there's my email. Number of inserts 9,999, number of updates 0. So that ran the merge, and it sent the email. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn around and run this a second time. It's actually going to process the same files because I don't move the files over to a processed area after I'm done. So it's going to pull down and process the same files. Well, it is going to run the merge, but there's not going to be anything for it to do. So it won't encounter any inserts or updates, and so there won't be an email to run. So if I run this a second time, now again, I could have put something in that wouldn't have processed the files again if I wanted to put that logic in. Runs the merge, but there were no inserts or updates, so there's nothing for it to do. If I had gone into one of the files, changed one of the rates, and threw it back up to the FTP server, I'd get an update out of this. I'm not going to go through that. You can obviously envision that one. So let me stop debugging here. And then the last step, I want to deploy this to SQL Server and see what SQL Server has to offer as far as statistics about the execution of this. Now, over in SQL Server, down at the bottom of my relational database instance, I've got an integration services catalog. Now I had to actually create that. You have to actually go through a step of, first of all, turning on CLR integration in the database engine, and then right-clicking an Object Explorer to actually create a new instance of an integration services catalog. Well, I've got one here, and it's simply called SSDB. That's a built-in name. You can't change it. Now, there's nothing in there at all. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come back here to bids. I'm going to right-click on the project. I'm going to take the option to deploy. If you've deployed packages before in SSIS, you might really like what they've done here in 2012. There is now a new deployment model. They haven't taken anything away, but there's now a new deployment model that goes right to that catalog. And we can do it at the project level. So I'll click Next here. And I've specified the database server. It's localhost SQL 2012. And then I have to indicate what the path is, where I want to deploy this. Well, I'll click Browse, and I want to make a new folder underneath the SSIS DB catalog, and I'll call it My Test SSIS Projects. Click OK. And then click OK. Well, notice what that actually does now. The path is going to be the catalog, the name of that primary folder, My Test SSIS Projects, and then the name of this project, MS Webcast SSIS. Well, I'll click Next, and then Deploy, and that pushes those packages out to that catalog. This is almost too easy. Compared with what you had to do before, this is very easy. Well, I'll go back over to Management Studio, and I'll refresh SSIS DB right here. Well, now I have the project and the individual packages. Well, here's what I'm going to do. First of all, I'm going to reset my table so I can run this package again and have it reinsert the data. So I'm going to delete all the sales data for 2000 that was 2009 and beyond that the package inserted. So right now, because of the result of that package, that inserted 9,999 new rows, and it did it pretty quickly. I'm going to actually delete those so I can start this package from scratch. So I'll execute that. So now I'm back to not having the data for 2009 and beyond. I'm going to run this package again and see what kind of statistics the management dashboard up here will give me. But before that, I want to change one of those parameters. So I'm going to right-click on the MS Webcast and configure it. And I'm going to go to the folder here, and I'm going to change that CSV exchange rates to CSV exchange rates, and I'll put my initials in. So I'll change the value here because I know that I don't have a folder called CSV exchange rates KSG. So I'm going to have it work with a whole new folder here. So obviously you get the idea. If I had a different parameter for the database, or if I wanted to change the email address, I'm not, because that's the only email address I have to work with. I could change any of these. So I now have a new parameter up here in the Integration Services catalog. Well, I'll right-click on this package, and I'll execute it. And notice how it automatically picks up that change to the package level parameter, or excuse me, to the project level parameter that comes down to the package. Well, I could also, if I wanted to change the connection managers here, I could. I'm going to keep these as the default. And I'll take OK. And watch what I get. It actually tells me that it started an instance of an execution. And I can actually run reports against it. Now, ask me if I want to open the report now. Well, I'll say no to that, and I'll look at the report in a second. First of all, I want to verify that actually created a folder called Currency Exchange Rates, CSV Currency Exchange with my initials. So if I look there it is, CSV Exchange Rates KSG with the two files. And I put that folder out there just a minute ago. Well, now I want to see some execution information about this package. Well, I'll actually, just to show something, I'll right-click and run it a second time, knowing obviously that the second time it'll run faster because it has a little bit less work to do. So I'll execute it a second time. And I'll say no to this, but then I will right-click on this package, and I'll take the option to run a standard report against all executions of it. Well, for anybody who ever wanted to, who wants to implement package logging just to log instances of when tasks run, you might appreciate the value of this report. First of all, it gives me the two instances of the executions, 25 and 26. Well, maybe I want to get an overview of 25, of the first one. So I'll click on the overview, and this actually runs another report. And these reports are implemented in reporting services. This gives me a recap of the execution. First of all, the total elapsed time of the package was 7.587 seconds. That includes the validation. The execution of the package itself was 5.8, so obviously there was a little bit of validation at the beginning. Well, I can actually sort here based upon the duration to see which task took the longest. And I can sort either ascending or descending. Well, not surprising, the pulling down from the FTP server took the longest. That was a whopping 2.668 seconds. And the email itself was 1.88 seconds. So the two biggest performers here, as far as amount of time, were to pull down files from an FTP server and then send an email. The running of that store procedure that did the merge on 10,000 rows. Now, 10,000 is obviously not a lot of data, but still, that ran in less than a second. The one thing I can assure you is that if we had done the individual inserts and updates separately, the amount of elapsed time would, in all likelihood, have been greater. So running that merge actually can be a performance boost. Well, if I want to actually get any more information about these, like the FTP server, I can click on the execution path here, and this will actually give me some of the same information that we might get if we implemented any kind of custom logging. It tells me the time for the pre-validate stage all the way to the on-post-execute stage. So the different events that we can get to in the event tab. Actually, we've got the equivalent of some basic custom logging here, telling us when those particular events ran. Now, at any time, I can go backwards to the prior report. So we've got the ability to drill down into some pretty deep level of detail and then come back up here to the top. Now, there is also the ability to look at the history of execution performance. If I click on the execution performance tab or link, this actually gives me the history of the executions. So we see the first time that took a little over 7 seconds to run. Second time took a little over 5 seconds to run. So we actually get a chart here of the historical executions. And you do have the ability in the interface here to filter the date range. So a DBA, an IT manager, an SSIS ETL specialist has a lot of different reporting capabilities that are in here to see the history of the package being executed. So a relative, on the grand scheme of things, relatively small package compared with the ETL packages that you normally see in production. But certainly this package demonstrates some of the same types of patterns that you will see in ETL packages. And we also saw some of the enhancements in SSIS 2012 along the way. So I'm going to go through a couple of questions here. Does SQL Express 2012 offer the SSIS catalog and other SSIS features? That is a very good question. I don't know. I'm going to have to research that and get back to the group. You know what? I want to take a guess, but I'm always afraid to guess if I'm wrong. I'm going to take a guess that the answer might be no, but I'm not positive. I'm going to have to look at that. So for Bill, that's a good question. I'll see if I can find out. Does a lookup on text, when using a lookup on text, does lookup have the option to automatically trim to handle the absence or presence of of trailing spaces. I believe if you're using a fixed width character, I believe the answer to that is no. I think that's got to be an exact match. So you probably would need a transformation there to begin with. Why not use the date type instead of the timestamp? I'm assuming that had to do with the conversion of the date. If not, let me know. But that's only because in the final destination table, the currency rate table, that was using a date time to begin with. So we had to use the same data type. If you're referring to something else, let me know. Is there some sort of Dropbox triggering that can be used to start an SSIS package automatically when a new rate file is added to an FTP site? Yes, there is. You would need to set up some type of maybe a WMI watch to actually poll for a new file being added to a site. So you need to set up some type of event task, maybe using WMI or just using another package. And when a new file is added, could you actually use that to launch an SSIS package? In short, the answer is yes. Now, depending upon whether that original watchdog that's checking for a new file is in a C# script or a package itself, that would depend upon how you would actually launch the package. But short answer, can you do it? The answer is yes. You have to probably write a little bit of code, but the answer is yes. And then there's a question from the beginning. If most of the production databases are still SQL 2008, 2008 R2, is there any benefit in creating SSIS 2012 packages and targeting the 2008 databases? Well, the answer to that is you would still have the ability, even if you were deploying packages to a file system, but targeting 2008 databases, you'd still have the ability to utilize some of the 2012 features. Maybe not necessarily all of them if you're not going to deploy to a 2012 database. So the amount of value that you get might drop a little bit, but you still would take advantage of some of the other new capabilities. So I'd say, would there be any benefit? There would probably still be some. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. Sorry for going late. I knew we'd probably go a little bit late today. Let me come back to my slide deck here, just one more minute. So let me come back to my slide deck. And again, next week, same time, same stations. Let me come back to the beginning here. We're going to be turning our attention to the new features over in the core business intelligence side. So next week, we're actually going to be looking at the new capabilities in the business intelligence semantic model. Now, next week is going to be sort of an overview. Because there is so much that we added to the tabular model and to Power Pivot, and the fact that we now have multiple ways to create analytic database, I'm going to use next week as an overview. So whereas today was kind of a pretty deep technical demo, next week we're going to sort of take a 30,000-foot view of what Microsoft now offers for creating analytic databases. Then we're going to launch into a multi-week session about some of the new capabilities, both in the tabular model as well as the new capabilities in Power Pivot. So we've covered quite a bit in the first 5 weeks, but still quite a bit to go. Now, again, the slide deck for this, if you let me come back to my desktop here. If you go out to my site, which is just simply kevinsgoff.net. So if I go over to the browser here, if you go to kevinsgoff.net, over the right-hand side in the categories, I actually have a webcast area here. And I've got the links for the download for the slide deck, as well as registrations for the upcoming weeks. Now, for anybody who actually pulls down the download for today, just a note, the download at the moment for today has the slide deck. It doesn't have the packages or the sample code. I will get that up later today, just unfortunately just did not get a chance to put it up before we started today. But by the end of the day, this download will be updated to have both the package that I built as well as the script and the CSV files if you want to try to reproduce this. The download at the moment only has the slide deck, but I'll get the rest of the examples up in that link by the end of the day today. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate everybody hanging around past 1. So see everybody next week, same time, same station. So thank you, and have a good weekend.